4 years ago, I rented an Airbnb for the holidays. I was planning to visit my family for Christmas week, so I chose a place that was a few miles away from their house. When I arrived on December 18th, everything seemed exactly as I expected. The house was ordinary, located in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It was just the kind of place I wanted for a peaceful stay. I got there around 6 p.m., and after the long drive, I didn't feel like going out to see anyone. I just wanted to rest and settle in. So I stayed in for the night, watching TV and getting a little work done. By 9:45, I was ready for bed, so I turned off the lights and fell asleep quickly. But in the middle of the night, I woke up to a strange noise. I was still groggy and I didn't bother checking the time, but I heard a few small thumps coming from downstairs. At first, I wasn't concerned. I thought it was just the house settling or maybe the heating system. I lay there for a minute listening, but then I drifted back to sleep and didn't think much of it. The next morning, I completely forgot about the noises. I was just glad to be in town, and I let my family know I had arrived safely. We made plans for dinner at their place. I spent the whole morning and afternoon at the Airbnb, relaxing, until it was time to head over. I grabbed my bag, keys, and walked to the front door. But when I opened it, I froze. There, standing on the porch, was a man. I had no idea how long he'd been there. He didn't knock or ring the bell, and he just stood there silently as I stared at him, trying to process the situation. "Can I help you?" I asked, but he didn't answer. He just nodded and walked away without saying a word. I watched as he walked down the street, disappearing into the night. I couldn't shake the unease I felt. Why was he standing there? Why didn't he knock? And how long had he been waiting? It was unsettling, to say the least. I made sure the place was locked up tight before heading to my family's house. I told them about the strange encounter, and they agreed it was definitely creepy. But dinner was still nice, and we had a great time catching up. That night, though, I couldn't stop thinking about the man on the porch. What if he was planning to break into the house? When dinner wrapped up around 9 p.m., I left and drove back to the Airbnb. It only took me about 15 minutes to get there, but I couldn't help looking around for any signs of someone being there while I was gone. Everything seemed normal when I parked, and I didn't see anything out of place. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, taking my keys and bag to the kitchen counter. That's when it happened again. A loud thump came from upstairs. It was the same type of noise I'd heard the night before, but this time it was much louder and came from the far side of the house. I slowly walked toward the noise, my heart racing. As I reached the hallway, there was another thump, this time from a door just ahead of me. The sound was so close I could feel it in my chest. My body froze. I stood there staring at the door when I suddenly heard faint, labored breathing coming from the other side. My blood ran cold. I didn't know who or what was behind that door, but I knew I couldn't stay to find out. I grabbed my keys and ran out the door. I jumped in my car and immediately called 911. I told them what had happened, and they arrived shortly after. They went inside, searching the house, and came back with chilling news. The door I'd heard the noise from was the garage door. It showed signs of damage, like someone had tried to break the lock and get inside. What I didn't know was that the previous tenants had left the side door to the garage unlocked. It connected to the outside, and whoever it was likely tried to get in through there. They didn't succeed, but just knowing someone was trying to break into the house while I was asleep upstairs is terrifying. We never figured out if the man I saw on the porch was the same person in the garage. The whole situation still haunts me. What was the man trying to do? Was he waiting for the right moment to break in? Or was he just trying to scare me? I stayed at a hotel for the rest of the week, but the feeling of someone lurking in the shadows never left my mind. Even 4 years later, I still think about that night and what might have happened if I hadn't called the police. A few weeks ago, I went on a trip where I rented an Airbnb townhouse. I was heading to a small town called Pine Hollow, located near some trails I wanted to hike. I had never been there before and didn't really know much about the area. I just knew it was in a convenient location for my plans. The drive was long, about 9 hours in total. By the time I arrived at the Airbnb, it was already getting late. The townhouse was located on a quiet street lined with several other similar homes. After finding the place, I parked my car on the road and grabbed my things to head inside. The townhouse looked decent from the outside. It wasn't new, but it was exactly what I was expecting for a rental. I texted the owner to let them know I had arrived, as I didn't see a passcode for the door in my emails. I stood there for a few minutes, looking out at the street, waiting for a reply. Then, I heard a door open nearby, and a man walked around the corner. He greeted me with a smile, introducing himself as the Airbnb host. He let me in and mentioned that he was staying right next door if I needed anything. It was a bit unexpected, but he quickly left, and I didn't think much more of it. I set up my things in the bedroom and had a quick look around the townhouse. Everything seemed normal, so I decided to go to bed early and get some rest. The next morning, I had a quick breakfast before heading out to hike one of the nearby trails. I spent a good 4 hours out there, enjoying the peace of nature. When I returned to the townhouse around 7 p.m., something felt off. As soon as I walked in, I noticed that a few things in my room seemed out of place. They weren't missing, but some of my belongings had been moved slightly. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there, but there was no real proof. It could have just been my nerves, given that I was in a new town. I spent about 30 minutes checking everything over, but there wasn't anything obvious to suggest someone had been inside while I was gone. Still, I couldn't shake that uneasy feeling. I decided to forget about it, heat up a frozen meal, and eat dinner while watching YouTube on my phone. At 11 p.m., I went to bed. This was a single-story townhouse, so my bedroom was at the end of a long hallway opposite the front door. I was used to sleeping in upstairs rooms, so it took me a while to get comfortable. I kept drifting off to sleep, only to wake up a few minutes later, repeating the cycle over and over. Then, about an hour into the night, I was lying there, still wide awake, when I heard something unusual. A door softly creaked open from across the house. It wasn't a random noise. It sounded intentional, like someone was trying to open the door as quietly as possible. I sat up in bed and listened, but I didn't hear anything else after that. I waited for a minute before cautiously getting up. I cracked my bedroom door open just enough to see down the hallway. From the dim light of the porch, I noticed that the front door was slightly open. That was strange. I quickly closed my bedroom door and locked it. My heart was racing as I moved to the back of the room and quietly called the police. As I was speaking with the operator, I heard a faint creak right outside my bedroom door. I glanced down and saw the outline of a shadow under the door. Someone was standing just outside. I immediately stopped talking, holding my breath and waiting for them to leave. After what felt like an eternity, the shadow disappeared, and I resumed my call. Thankfully, the operator stayed on the line until the officers arrived. By the time they got there, the person had already left. But they did find clear signs of someone having been inside. There were shoe prints all over the place, and it was evident that someone had entered the townhouse. The police confirmed my suspicions. They also noted that the front door had been opened without any sign of forced entry. However, they didn't find any evidence to suggest the host had been involved. What disturbed me the most was that there was no sign of anything being taken, and the intruder only returned once I was back at the house. The officers couldn't confirm who the intruder was or what their intentions were, but in my mind the situation seemed to have been focused on me. I can't stop thinking about what could have happened if I hadn't called the police. I stayed in a hotel for the rest of my trip, but the thoughts of that night continued to haunt me. I wonder if the person is still out there, and if they were watching me from the shadows that night. I don't know what they wanted, but I'm just thankful I wasn't alone when things escalated. A few weeks ago, my two best friends and I decided to rent a house for New Year's Eve. We weren't interested in attending large parties, but preferred hanging out with our small group. All of us lived in dorm rooms, so having a house to ourselves for the night sounded like the perfect idea. We didn't need a lavish party atmosphere, just a place to enjoy each other's company. My friend Matt rented a cabin outside of the small town of Pine Hill, about a 2-hour drive from where we lived. I carpooled with my friend Jack, and we met Matt at the cabin around 1 p.m. The cabin was surrounded by trees, making it feel like we were isolated from the rest of the world. There were other similar cabins in the area, but they were spaced out enough that we felt we had privacy. The cabin itself wasn't the most luxurious, but for the price it was decent. It had all the essentials: a cozy living room, a functional kitchen, and a couple of bedrooms. We weren't expecting much, just a place to relax and have a good time. We spent the afternoon lounging in the living room, talking and catching up. Jack went out around 4 p.m. to grab some snacks and drinks from a nearby store. During that time, Matt and I were sitting on the couch when we heard a knock at the door. We both exchanged confused glances. It was odd for anyone to be out here, especially knocking on the door of an Airbnb. I got up and peeked through the peephole. A man was standing on the porch, looking slightly out of place. I hesitated for a moment but decided to open the door just enough to see him. The man looked at me with a displeased expression, his face hard and unfriendly. He said with an air of aggression that we needed to keep the noise down tonight. His tone made it clear he was already annoyed, even though we hadn't been loud. The cabins were so far apart, it was impossible for him to hear anything, unless we were making a huge ruckus. Still, I wasn't in the mood for confrontation. I nodded and agreed, then quickly shut the door. Not even a second later, he knocked again, more forcefully this time. I ignored him and exchanged a bewildered look with Matt. After a few moments, we heard him leave. When Jack returned, we told him about the strange encounter. He didn't believe us at first, but he could see we were both unsettled. The evening passed uneventfully. We watched a movie and played games until around 11:30 p.m. Just as we were about to call it a night, we heard something outside, what sounded like a glass bottle shattering. We rushed to the window and saw the same man from earlier, standing by Jack's car, a metal baseball bat in his hand. His face was twisted in anger, and he was pacing around as though in a frenzy. The man took the bat and smashed the windshield of Jack's car, sending glass everywhere. We all froze, unsure of what to do. Jack, furious, stormed to the door, determined to confront him. Matt and I tried to stop him, but before we could even reach him, a gunshot rang out. The sound of the shot made me freeze. I was certain it was aimed at Jack. For a brief moment, everything seemed to slow down. Then, to my shock, I saw Jack sprint back inside, slamming the door behind him. More shots followed, hitting the side of the cabin. We heard the man swing the bat against the front door with a loud thud. Then, just as quickly as it started, everything went silent. The man fled into the woods, disappearing into the night. My heart was pounding in my chest as we all tried to process what had just happened. We immediately called the police, and they arrived not long after. They inspected the area and discovered that the man wasn't one of the neighbors, nor did they have any information about who he was or where he had come from. He had simply snapped. There were no signs of forced entry, but it was clear that his actions had been unpredictable and violent. We never figured out why he targeted us, or if he had been planning to do more. It was the kind of encounter that makes you realize how fragile everything is and how quickly things can escalate. That night, we locked every door and stayed together, too shaken to sleep properly. By the time the police had finished their investigation, it was nearly 3 a.m. We didn't feel safe anymore and decided to leave the cabin early. The rest of the trip was a blur, but that night still haunts me. To this day, I can't help but wonder who that man was and what could have happened if we hadn't locked the door when we did. It was an experience none of us will ever forget.